Is the interview that our Foreign Affairs editor Lilian Lodera had with the Deputy Executive Coordinator for United Nations Volunteers, Toily Kurbanov. Let's listen into that before we take a break.
The United Nations Volunteers Program is a UN organization that promotes voluntarism in support of peace and development worldwide. With me to help discuss this issue, the importance of voluntarism and the essence of it, is Mr. Toily Kurbanov, the Deputy Executive Coordinator of UN Volunteers. Mr. Kurbanov, thank you for making time for KTN News. First of all, maybe you'd want to start by giving us a brief overview of the essence of voluntarism and what mission brings you to Kenya.
Thank you very much, Lilian. First of all, just call me Toily. Jina langu ni Toily, right? I got it right, I hope. Very pleased to be in Kenya. Maybe I should start with the second part. I'm in Kenya, in Nairobi, because Kenya is important for voluntarism globally and in the United Nations. Kenya is a country that has a strong tradition of the volunteer service. It's embedded in the national culture of the different groups that live in this glorious land. I understand there is a term, Kuji Taleo, that stands for the self-service, for the community service, that speaks how deeply embedded voluntarism is in the Kenyan culture. Kenya is also important because you're a young country. And we expect that all the new solutions come from the young countries. Kenya is not just a young country, but it's a country that, through youthful engagement, had come up with a lot of innovative solutions. From the mobile banking that was unheard of, unspeakable before it started in Kenya, to so many other elements of how technology was used to bring about social accountability, cohesion, and the rest. So Kenya could be the lead in promoting and defining volunteerism as it will be relevant in the 21st century. So that's why Kenya is important. One last thing I should add, Kenya is hosting the largest UN family on the African continent. Here in the United Nations office in Nairobi, we have so many colleagues from so different entities. And it was important for me to meet all of them. And now I'm coming to the first part of your question. Because the main purpose of the United Nations volunteers is to help United Nations agencies, funds, and programs to implement their activities in different countries, especially at the community level, through bringing to bear volunteer passion, volunteer expertise, volunteer dedication.
How does the United Nations Volunteers Program help in achieving the United Nations peace and security agenda?
It's our volunteers, Lilian, it's all our volunteers who are working with UNDP or with the peacekeeping missions or with UNHCR, with UNICEF. Our job is to create opportunities for them through work with UN agencies to empower them so that they can become agents of peace and development. We know that peace and development come together. Where there is no development, sooner or later there would be some challenges for a peaceful environment. So it's United Nations volunteers and other volunteers who work in the field, as we say, in the communities, to help communities through the livelihood programs, working with the government, or through improved access to social services. A lot of these agents of change, those UN colleagues whom we meet in the field, they're actually UN volunteers.
Most governments in sub-Saharan Africa are dealing with the heavy burden of unemployment generally, rising over 50% of the youthful populations are underemployed. How can UN volunteers help generate employment and help these countries be able to create wealth?
There aren't that many obvious solutions that are easy to implement overnight. I think a place to start is for everybody to recognize how important it is to attain demographic dividend. On that count, we're very confident that the governments of the African continent, the civil society, the private sector, already recognize this problem. As we say often, the right problem statement is halfway to the problem solution. We should not take it for granted. Many countries in the past had avoided or did not recognize on time, in a timely fashion, the demographic dividend issue. But here we recognize it. It will take whole of society approach. The governments by themselves are going to and are putting out their political manifestos, their development agendas, and trying to rally their resources and different stakeholders inside the countries. And of course, it is understandable that in youthful societies that need to generate jobs in countries such as where we meet, where hundreds of thousands are graduating from the school system every year. It is important that both the educational systems are tuned to the needs of the labor market, and the labor market is flexible enough and open enough. It creates more opportunities for private investment by domestic investors first and foremost. So it will take whole of society approach, partnership between the government and the private sector for sure, and involvement of the civil society.
We have been speaking to Mr. Toily Kurbanov, the Deputy Executive Director of UN Volunteers. Mr. Toily, thank you so much for making time for KTN News.
Thank you, Lillian, for that. And that interview takes us to a very short break, but Bottom Line Africa will return shortly. Stay with us.